Afternoon, members. We've not been advised of any apologies, any to be noted, members, or late arrivals. Okay. So, to page 5 of your packs, we have an invitation from the Commission for Victims and Survivors, and they're asking us if we would like to attend all or part of a 2-day review of the Victims and Survivors strategy. They're holding this in Titanic Belfast on the 9th and 10th of March. Could I ask members wishing to attend to contact Commission directly. Also want to contact the organisers directly over is at page 10, and it's an invitation from Queen's University Belfast, who are hosting a conference on childhood acquired brain injury, and that's at Queen's on March the 11th. Page 12, you'll see a request from NICVA to hold an informal meeting in advance of the committee's consideration of our legacy report. Now, the legacy report, members, of course, is a retrospective. It's a look back at the work of the committee over the mandate and a short commentary on issues that the incoming committee may wish to take forward. And committee staff hope to have a draft prepared for initial consideration next week, and the plan is to finalise the report at our meeting on the 2nd of March. So, any comments on the timeline, members? And if not, in terms of the NICVA briefing, it seems to me that they have committees which are almost like statutory committees. They're shadowing the work of government departments. I don't think it would be appropriate for them to be influencing our legacy report so much as perhaps inputting into what the next committee might be looking at. But I am on that. If you're content with that broad thrust, I'm content to meet them for a round-table discussion and let every member know when it is in case they want to come along. Yeah. Okay. And a list of current committee invitations is at page 13 in the main pack. Just to note. I refer next to the draft minutes of our meeting held on the 10th of February. They begin at page 15 of your main pack. And the question, as always, are members content to agree the draft minutes of the meeting of the 10th of February? Thank you. Last week, the committee noted correspondence from the department with regard to response to the issue of redress for victims of historical institutional child abuse and the issue of those victims who fall out with the remit of the HIA inquiry. First of all, are members content to forward the department's correspondence to Amnesty International and Savia for information? Thank you. And at page 4 of tabled papers, you will find the options papers relating to those out with the scope of the current HIA inquiry. The First Minister and Deputy First Minister have advised that the Executive has agreed the following options. Number 1, with regard to mother and baby homes, stroke the Magdalene asylums or laundries, that residents aged 18 or over should see established an interdepartmental working group led by the Department of Health to review the evidence with the objective of making recommendations to the Executive within 6 months. And with regard to clerical child abuse, the recommendation is engage the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland, established by the Department of Health, to examine the issue of clerical abuse stroke child abuse and to make recommendations to the Executive. And I'll pause there for comment.
Well, you know, this is what those who were making representations were looking for was hard outcomes and hard models. What we have is a vague process on the far side of which we don't know what will happen. And I'm sure I haven't spoken to Savia or to any of its spokespeople, but I can only imagine that they'll be gravely disappointed, because this, after all this time and being given the runaround by OFMDFM to end up with more process on both fronts. I don't really know, is there a timeline in respect of the clerical child abuse?
No.
No. So there's a 6 months timeline in respect of mother and baby, and there's no time at all in respect of clerical child abuse. So, unsatisfactory doesn't describe it.
But I think if you go to page 4 in table pack, Alex, you'll see in the cover note, signed off by the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, the 2 bullet points. The first one begins or ends with within 6 months, and the second one absolutely does not have a timeline on it. So, as you say, we've waited a long time for the outcome of these scoping exercises, and the recommendation seems to be to set up a process to make a recommendation.
Well, I think we shouldn't invite Savia to come to the committee.
I think Savia and Amnesty have asked to come and see us. I wonder whether we should ask for a briefing from officials. The alternative, of course, is on the 9th of March we have the principals, First Minister and Deputy First Minister in front of us. So on that basis, it may be counterproductive to ask officials, because this is a political decision ultimately. They have done what they have been asked to do.
Yep.
But I just urge members to think, if you were a victim or believed yourself to be a victim out with the scope and the terms of reference of the HA inquiry, and you've waited all this time, would you be satisfied to hear that the process to make recommendations ended with a recommendation that there is another process to make recommendations? But there we are. I think we've agreed that we will not ask for a briefing from officials. We will put it on our agenda for the session with FM and DFM. Okay. Outstanding correspondence begins at page.
I think we need to see Savia and Margaret.
Oh yes,
and
sorry, yes,
before that.
Before the 9th.
They're scheduled for the second
So,
of March.
Are they already scheduled?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, outstanding correspondence begins at page 22, members. In the absence of any particular comment, I draw your attention to correspondence received since we last met. The summary sheet is at page 26. Just to draw your attention to correspondence between the Department and Balnafie Community Development Association. It's actually at page 148, correspondence from the Department with regard to recent cuts to funding of Balnafie Community Development Association. I'm just asking if members are content to forward the correspondence from the Department to Balnafie CDA for their information. Thank you. Anything else any member wants to raise with regard to correspondence? If not, we move on to the draft forward work programme, which is on page 181 of your pack. In the absence of comment, members, I would just point out that we have Regenerate, which is this Portadown-based organisation who wanted to brief us about work they'd been doing in their locality with regard to the flying of flags on street furniture. I think they're due in on the 16th. We all awoke to the news that Queen's University had published some proposals with regard to the flying of flags, both on government buildings and unofficially. Would you wish to combine the meeting with Regenerate with a meeting with Queen's if they are available on the 16th?
Yep.
Yes, no, I'm not hearing any no's, so we'll see if Queen's are available. Obviously we're getting very close to the recess, members, and we would not wish it to be a contentious occasion, particularly as I won't be here.
Flagging that up, or
Yes, or flag it down, whichever way you want to look at it. Okay. So, members, our first substantive bit of business is considering a legislative consent memorandum on the Northern Ireland Stormont Agreement and Implementation Plan Bill. We did not have prior notice of this item of business. It was only added to the agenda today after the memorandum was laid in the business office on the 12th of the month. That said, you'll still find a copy of the LCM at page 184 in your meeting packs. A copy of the Northern Ireland Stormont House Agreement and Implementation Plan Bill and the explanatory note begin at page 51 of tabled papers, and a House of Commons Library briefing paper is also in tabled papers at page 75. Under Standing Order 47A7, we have 15 working days from the date of referral to consider the provisions of the bill and report to the Assembly. And that means we are required to agree a report on the LCM at our meeting on the 2nd of March. The Northern Ireland Stormont Agreement and Implementation Plan Bill gives effect to a number of commitments which are contained in the Fresh Start document. The bill deals mainly with matters which are either accepted or reserved to Westminster. However, there are two matters which are devolved. First of all, the power for the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, acting jointly, to nominate two members of the Independent Reporting Commission, and that is in clause 1.4. And secondly, there is the establishment of new measures relating to the financial responsibility of the Assembly, and that you will find at clause 9. Officials from the Department of Finance and Personnel and the Department of Justice are joining us for today's briefing, given the relevance of the LCM to those departments. So we welcome Joanne McBurney from the DFP and Simon Rogers from the Department of Justice, who are joining Neil Jackson, representing the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister. Neil, I'm going to ask you to make opening remarks, but first of all, can you address the timeline? Was it not possible to get this to us any earlier for scrutiny?
The bill was just introduced in the House of Commons on the 10th, which is last Wednesday, and the Secretary of State formally requested the First Minister and Deputy First Minister bring forward a legislative consent motion shortly after, so it was tabled as soon as we practically could.
Okay.
Thank you. Chair, I think you've probably covered the main sort of backgrounds and the introductions. As you say, the majority of the provisions in the Stormont Agreement and Implementation Plan Bill do deal with accepted or reserved matters. The Secretary of State has, however, requested an LCM in respect of two provisions. The first is the power for the First Minister and Deputy First Minister acting jointly to nominate two members to the proposed Independent Reporting Commission. The Reporting Commission will be established by the UK and Irish governments under treaty and will have the overarching objective of promoting progress towards ending paramilitary activity connected with Northern Ireland. Clause 1 of the bill enables the First Minister and Deputy First Minister to nominate two of the four commissioners jointly, and the other two will be nominated, one each, by the UK Government and the Government of Ireland. The second set of provisions requiring an LCM relate to the establishment of new measures relating to the financial responsibility of the Assembly, and these are contained in Clause 9. These will introduce more transparency into the budgetary process by requiring the Minister of Finance and Personnel to lay a statement before the Assembly at least 14 days in advance of laying a draft budget. This statement will specify the amount of UK funding for the financial year as notified by the Secretary of State. A further statement must be laid alongside the draft budget, showing that the amount of UK funding required by the draft budget will not exceed the amount available as set out in the first statement. Where the amount of UK funding is revised, the Minister must lay a further statement within 4 months of such notification, showing the revisions to the expenditure proposals where changes are required as a result of the notification. And these proposals again must not exceed the revised amount of UK funding available. These are therefore the elements of the bill that require an LCM, and we content to take any questions you may have on the proposal for approval.
The explanatory notes from the House of Commons Library paper makes clear that the House of Commons Library paper makes clear that the explanatory notes don't explain why we're doing this through Westminster legislation and not doing it through the chamber here. Can you explain why that is?
I think my understanding is the proposal is that these are part of reserved provisions. Sorry, in relation to the, are you speaking specifically about the...
These two clauses. Why aren't we bringing forward legislation on those two specifics here? Why are we doing it via a legislative consent mechanism?
Well, the nominations to the Commission are part of a wider set of provisions relating to sort of an accepted matter, and therefore, for efficiency and practicality, it makes more sense that they be part of those measures rather than have to be dealt with separately. Would be my suggestion. Yeah.
And what would happen if, in the event the Assembly said we will not support this LCM?
Well, that would be a question, I think, for the Secretary of State to consider at that stage. As you know, the Westminster Government reserves to it the right to legislate on any matter relating to Northern Ireland, but normally doesn't do so without the consent of the Assembly in relation to a devolved matter. Therefore, that question would have to be considered by the Secretary of State at that time.
And with regard to the other part, which is with regard to the financial responsibilities, why has this been necessary? We haven't needed it since 1998, have we?
No, we haven't needed it since 1998. It was agreed as part of the Fresh Start, the Stormont Agreement and Implementation Plan that this legislation would be brought into place. So because it's in that agreement, we're legislating at this point in time. It doesn't actually ask us to do anything that we wouldn't normally be doing because it's about living within our Treasury control totals.
So why is it necessary to enshrine it in legislation?
As I say, that was part of the Stormont Agreement, that it would be enshrined in legislation.
Well, I wouldn't expect you to accept the language, but what we have now is that the Minister for Finance has to send his homework to be marked by the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
There's actually no difference from, we already have to live within the Treasury control tools, as this is just formalising the process for that. It requires the Minister to lay a statement in the Assembly setting out what those control totals are. Usually control totals would be announced as part of the budget process. This simply brings it forward by 14 days.
I would suggest anybody looking at this will think this proves that the finances of Stormont became broken. I don't think that's any secret with regard to what's happened over the last year or two. And London felt necessary to step in, and in fact this to some extent surrenders devolved power back to central government.
I wouldn't say it surrenders devolved power because it is our Minister that makes the statement and our Minister that lays the budget. And he simply has to explain how that comes within the spending control total set by the Treasury. That would happen as part of the normal budget process in any event, because all of the devolved administrations are required to live within their spending controls. So it simply formalises a process that's already in place.
And, well, I still don't understand why that has been necessary now when it could have been done in 1998 or 2007.
I'm afraid I can't really comment on that. It probably just wasn't.
Simon, Department of Justice content with this part of the bill?
Well, the bit we're interested in concerns the Commission rather than the budget. But from our perspective, certainly we're content that it's doing what the agreement sets out to achieve.
Does this have any impact, Neil, on the operation, on the functionality of OFMDFM and the ministers?
It confers an additional power, obviously, onto the Minister in relation to nomination, and I expect that some of the work of OFMDFM, including and Department of Justice and possibly other departments, will come under the scrutiny of the Commission in due course in relation to its assessment of its role in combating paramilitarism.
Okay, Alex Maskey.
Sure, I mean, I support the LCM, obviously, and as you well know, it's part of a wider agreement, and I think it's actually very important and regrettable that you have introduced a kind of a headline-grabbing attempt there about surrendering. There's been nothing surrendered in this whatsoever at all. As you well know, you're part of the negotiations. You may not have played a full part as you should have done. That's another day's discussion.
And I didn't sign up. I didn't sign up to
the finances were broken.
Start.
You know the politics were broken. You were part of that. So I don't think you should be introducing a political argument in this. Deal with the issue. Deal with the LCM.
I think my questions are entirely valid, and I will stand over them.
Fair enough. I don't accept it.
That's fine. That's politics. Anybody else with a question? Alex Atwood.
like some of these questions, I don't expect much of an answer to, and that's it's no reflection upon you as officials, because well, some people might sort of get anxious about it. You know, Fresh Start was a political document produced by two parties, given to other parties less than an hour before an executive meeting was convened to endorse it. So you'll understand why I'll keep my distance from it, but I do think there are some questions that legitimately arise in relation to this legislation. And I think the questions, or some of the questions, might be as follows. As I say, not expecting much, in some issues, not many answers for reasons I think would be self-evident. Could I ask Joanne, what is the policy intention behind putting into law what is essentially now a budget cap, borrowing from the Treasury's introduction of the benefit cap? What's the policy intention? If there's nothing that's actually materially changed, why have London insisted to FM and DFM that they must put into law and that we must consent to it?
My understanding is that this is just simply formalising the arrangements that were happening anyway. When we are giving spending controls by the Treasury and we are expected to live within those controls, this simply formalises that and places those controls in a legislative framework, thereby insisting that the Finance Minister announces them in the Assembly. Say they would have been announced in any rate, but it formalises those controls and allows more transparency and ensures that the Assembly is aware of those controls in advance of a budget being laid.
I hear what you're saying and I acknowledge that, but I actually don't think that's the policy intention. And I wonder, is the policy intention actually less about the budget that comes across every year and more actually about the welfare cap? So my question is, does this new procedure put into law a welfare cap as well as a budget cap?
No, that wouldn't be my understanding, because the welfare budget is funded from the annually managed expenditure budget and it isn't subject to set spending controls. The annually managed budget is revised on the basis of forecasts, usually twice a year.
That's not what Tommy O'Reilly told the parties in the negotiations at Stormont House, where he said that there was a welfare cap for Northern Ireland.
My understanding is, and I'm sorry, this is not my area of responsibility, is that the welfare cap applies at a UK level, but of course Northern Ireland expenditure and welfare does feed into that cap and would be scrutinised. However, the AME budget wouldn't be part of the controls notified to us by the Secretary of State. That would be primarily our DEL controls.
I think there's a tension between what DSD and DFP consider is a situation with respect to the welfare cap, because I think there's people in this room will recall that Mr O'Reilly told the parties that there was a welfare cap. Whether or not it is notional, whether it is honoured or not, is a different matter, but he did tell us that. And I do believe that there is one. And you would think that there has to be one, given that up until a notorious moment before Christmas, we had responsibility for welfare, at least for in previous years, if not in this year. So are you giving us a reassurance that whatever the policy intention is behind this, and I think there must be some answer to it, it doesn't apply to the welfare cap in terms?
Certainly my understanding. That wasn't mentioned in the negotiations around developing the legislation, and my understanding is that the annually managed expenditure budget will be continued to be managed in the way it currently is. You know, when our minister lays a budget, he doesn't touch on AME.
In the bill, I haven't got the bill with me, but I think it's probably clause 6, or certainly late on. There's the reference to a programme for government being agreed within 14 days of an assembly election. Now, in a paragraph in Fresh Start, again, I haven't got that with me, but somehow paragraph 61, I stand corrected in that, there's this reference to parties before a programme for government is concluded having to decide whether they're going to enter into government or not. So the clause that's in the bill just deals with a programme for government being agreed within 14 days. But there's a separate matter that's in Fresh Start, but is not in the draft legislation. So my question is, that, as far as you're aware, is that reference in Fresh Start, which refers to...
Alex, I'm very sorry to interrupt, but I believe you're outside the terms of the LCM here.
Well, are we not getting general briefing on this? No?
I think this is outside the 14 days is not.
It's nothing to do with it whatsoever.
Well, it's certainly in the bill.
And neither was the last issue around the welfare, the LCM, by the way, but that's another day's discussion. We're trying not to waste any more time today.
Well, I'll accept the judgment of the Chair. I do think that it's in the bill, so you know, it'd be useful to hear an answer to that question. If there's not going to be an answer to that question, can I ask Simon, the proposal to OFMDFM to nominate people to the International Reporting Commission, given the work that is that's been undertaken, is Justice satisfied that the nominations come from FM and DFM, given that elements, if not a lot, of the work of the IRC rather, is actually going to touch upon the issue of the Justice Ministry?
Yes, we are content with that. I think in the normal scheme of events, there'd certainly be expected to be, and I would anticipate there will be consultation with our Minister, the Minister of Justice. We've no difficulty with the format.
And that's the view of the Minister?
Yeah.
Like, my concern about the IRG and how it is going to be nominated in part is that people end up being gatekeepers as opposed to drilling down where they need to drill down. There's a danger that people become gatekeepers, and that wouldn't serve the ambition of having any international reporting commission. Could I also just flag up that in the legislation, when it comes to the work of the IRG, once again we have seen written across the legislation in two parts that the IRG can't do anything.
What's the IRG got to do with this discussion?
National Reporting Commission.
IRC?
IRC, National Reporting Commission. The IRC, written across the legislation, I think in two parts, is reference to national security, and that the IRC can't do anything that is in conflict with national security, whatever that might mean. Now, there's 4 other sub-clauses, I think, in that clause, which I don't have as much difficulty with. In fact, I'd accept a lot of the sub-clauses, but that sub-clause, so the IRC, before it even starts its work, is already being told by the British government, mindful that the British government can issue regulations about how it conducts its affairs, and that could open up a whole lot of other issues. The IRC is working within those strictures laid down by the British government as to what they mean by that. That's a matter of comment. That's why I suggested earlier that you mightn't be in a position to deal with that. Could I just ask a wider question then? If this briefing is about the LCM and that touches upon two matters,
Just 2 matters within the bill, yeah.
are we going to get a general briefing in respect of all the other clauses in the bill? Do affect the life of this assembly because it affects the ministerial code and the obligations of members generally?
Well, they are reserved or accepted matters. So I am assuming that is a matter for colleagues at Westminster.
The code for members, is that accepted? Simon will know.
The pledge of office is an accepted matter.
For ministers,
Yes.
members, and this bill touches upon the obligations of members as well.
The advice we've taken, I think, collectively on this is that the only two elements that do fall within like competence of the Assembly are the two before us today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. David McAfee.
Yeah, thanks, Gerald. I'll try and get this. Should be fairly quick. I suspect we're possibly at risk of overcomplicating things slightly on this bill. I mean, my interpretation of this is purely this is just to tidy up something that over time has become a bit too relaxed, and in that no matter how noble and sort of Robin Hood-like some members might care to be, particularly government ministers, they do have to live within spending limits. So something that previously to this legislation had been, I guess, a given that everybody would voluntarily sign up to is now effectively being enshrined in legislation. Is that it in a nutshell?
Yes, that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. That's all I need to know, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Joanne, if I don't mind, just two under points of information, clarification, facts. In 9, clause 9, part of it says if during the course of a financial year the Secretary of State says to us, actually we're adjusting the monies, and it could be up as well as down, that there is a period of 4 months for the Minister for Finance and Personnel to lay before the Assembly a statement specifying how he or she is reacting to that. Is that 4-month period new?
The requirement to do it is new, as in the requirement being set out, but what we actually do will not change because we have in-year monitoring rounds, and that's why it's a 4-month period, because that sort of fits in with the in-year monitoring cycle, whereby we take account of any changes to our control totals and bring a statement to the Assembly to specify those changes.
I thought there were only 3 monitoring rounds per annum.
The timing of the changes to the control totals are likely to be around the Chancellor's March budget and the autumn statement. So within that 4-month period from those two major times will be that. Obviously, if there was a major event in between those times, we may have to bring an additional statement out with the normal monitoring round process, but it's nothing that we wouldn't normally do if there were significant changes to our control totals.
And just again, I think your main message is this is what we have been doing, it is simply enshrining it in legislation. So on that basis, can I ask, is there similar legislative provision for the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly?
There is a similar clause in the Wales Act. It's not identical, but it has similar. I think it requires their Secretary of State to make a statement as regards control tools. As far as I'm aware, there's not one in the Scotland Act, but every devolved administration is required to live within their spending controls as set out by the Treasurer.
Okay, members content? Okay, Joanne, Simon and Neil, thank you very much indeed. Okay, members, we move on to the first of 2 departmental briefings, and the first... Sorry, just one sec. Is there a question? Oh, yeah. No. Members, just as this is cross-cutting across finance and personnel and justice, could I suggest that we might be prudent to seek the views of the 2 relevant committees, the Committee for Finance and Personnel, Committee for Justice, just to make sure that they are content. Thank you. So, members, our inquiry into Together Building a United Community, which we completed last year, is now up for debate as we hear from departmental officials. Clerk's brief is at page 188. Our recommendations from the inquiry begin at page 191. The OFMDFM initial response to our recommendations is at page 198. There's correspondence from OFMDFM of the 17th November last at page 246. The draft terms of reference for the TBUC Engagement Forum are on page 252. Correspondence from the Department on Programme for Government Commitments, a number of which relate to TBUC, can be found in tabled papers at 109. And OFMDFM's response to issues discussed relating to November and January monitoring and the budget 2016, which again include matters relating to TBUCs, are on page 113 of tabled. And finally, tabled again, is a briefing paper received from the department, and that's on page 87 of tabled, and it's in tabled because it was received at 4:09 yesterday. So we welcome Donna Blaney, Tonya Killen, and Dr. Mark Brown. Mark, just before I ask for your opening remarks, could you enlighten us on the £20 million that OFMDFM is borrowing from DFP, as was announced by Minister Storey yesterday?
Yes, Chair, happy to. This isn't, in fact, borrowing in the normal sense of the word. This is a technical issue which relates to cash flow. There's no increase to the OFMDFM budget. It's entirely within the normal rules and procedures that are set out, and it doesn't suggest or imply any weakness in financial control. I think it's important to make those points. The reason this has occurred is that at the start of the year, before budgets are fully voted through, departments get a vote on account. It's 45% of the previous year's provision, and that's to allow the department to make payments and so forth. Then the main estimates give the department the full amount. The problem for us is that that isn't enough to cover us over the year, because we get so much money in year that the main estimates confirm the opening budget, but our closing budget is some 25 million higher than our opening budget. So the fact that the main estimates give us the cash we need based on our opening position means that there's always the risk that we won't have enough cash to cover what is required during the course of the year. It's because we draw down funding from central funds, for example, that you'll be familiar with, but also significantly because we make substantial payments on behalf of other departments on the basis of the financial transactions capital. And in this case, there's some £25 million of commitments. We're going to Queen's to meet their the computer science department. So that's it's a purely technical issue relating to cash flow, Chair.
So it's cash flow, you get the money now, you give it back when the cash balances out. Okay, thank you very much. Be clear. So, T-Buck.
Thank you very much, Chair. Officials previously briefed the committee in May 2015 and October 2015 on the inquiry. First of all, I'd like to welcome the comments and the recommendations that the committee made to support and enhance the Executive's Good Relations strategy. We have discussed the recommendations with all departments, and we have shared the implementation plan with the Good Relations Programme Board. And I'm pleased to say that we are taking forward the full range of recommendations in the committee's report. It wouldn't be practical, Chair, and I don't think you would want us to go through every single recommendation, and the responses. They're included in the table which we provided, or the plan which we provided to you. But perhaps I'll just draw attention to a couple of particularly important aspects. First of all, around the T-Buck Engagement Forum, good progress has been made there. We've been working closely with the Community Relations Council and the sector to develop the terms of reference. I think you have a draft terms of reference. They are currently with ministers for finalisation. The sector has been very positive towards the commitment made by the department to meaningful and structured engagement, and the arrangements have been generally well received. The forum will involve the voluntary community sector in the delivery of the Good Relations vision, and it will give the sector an opportunity to identify any enabling or any constraining factors and enhance community engagement and interaction both within the sector and between government and the sector. So this engagement will encourage innovation, hopefully. It will help to identify and embed best practice. It will inform delivery, direction, and it will support an outcome-based approach to delivery. Following each forum meeting, the Community Relations Council, it's intended the Community Relations Council will collate and produce a summary record for dissemination to stakeholders. CRC will also be responsible for producing advice papers as appropriate to OFMDFM and other relevant and appropriate elements of the T-Buck architecture, such as the Good Relations Programme Board, the Ministerial Panel and the thematic groups. And the advice papers will focus on suggestions and recommendations for improved delivery and implementation of T-Buck. The first meeting of the forum is scheduled for the 10th of March 2016, and the first meeting will also include within it a workshop which will look at and examine the attitudes of young people towards good relations and will include an update on the implementation of the racial equality strategy. Turning to rural proofing, a number of the committee recommendations relate to how programmes can be better delivered in a rural context. All departments with responsibility for headline actions have confirmed that their programmes have been rural proofed. A number of the projects are of course, and programmes are delivered in rural areas. For example, one of the United Youth pilot programmes is being delivered by the Rural Development Council in Mid-Ulster. 2 of the shared neighbourhoods are in rural areas, Saintfield and Cookstown. There are 3 shared education campuses in rural areas, Limavady, Moy and Ballycastle. And young people from rural areas were involved in a number of the 100 summer camps. And in addition, DCAL are considering expanding their cross-community sports programme into a rural area as they take that forward. In relation to interfaces, which was another key area of interest to the committee raised some concerns regarding the complexities surrounding the removal of interface barriers, including the concerns of those who live directly around interface areas. And we fully recognise that community engagement, support and consent are key to the delivery of this headline action, and we will continue to work closely with our colleagues in the Department of Justice to ensure that this happens. The DOJ is in the process of setting up a programme board which will provide strategic direction to the interface programme and will ensure there are clear lines of communication with the community and voluntary sector to ensure their input to the design of any programme. And the views of residents will continue to be sought as a key input to that process. The committee also noted the need for work in this area to focus on the social and economic needs of those living close to interface areas and to take a more holistic approach to the whole process of barrier removal. And the North Belfast Strategic Good Relations Programme is one programme where this approach is being adopted by OFMDFM officials. North Belfast contains almost half of the physical barriers within the city, and the North Belfast Strategic Good Relations Programme, such as the North Talks 2 initiative, where local representatives from both communities work together on good relations programmes and shared space projects. The Girdwood Community Hub is one such shared space in North Belfast that has benefited from the cohesion and integration work that the group has facilitated. Officials have been working to make the North Belfast programme more outcome focused, and this has enabled contract holders to structure their provision accordingly. In addition to this, the CRC has funded some scoping exercise to determine how programmes could be delivered in other places containing areas of contested space, such as East Belfast, Portadown and Lurgan. This exercise suggested that there are a number of possible approaches for these interventions, and these are currently being considered by officials to inform future intervention planning in these areas. In relation to finance, the Department is working to develop a budget profile for each of the headline actions up to 2020. Departments with responsibility for the headline actions have been asked to provide project plans with targets and associated costs to assist with longer-term financial planning. We recognise the uncertainty that short-term funding brings to groups, and we will look at potential improvements to allow funding to be made available as early as possible. This will include carrying out mid-term evaluations in a timely manner to inform future funding and streamlining processes to ensure that any gap in funding is minimised. 2016-17 will, however, for reasons that the committee will be familiar with, be a one-year funding cycle, but we'll seek to bring forward multi-annual budgets from 2017. In terms of shared learning, this is another area where we continually seek to improve. For example, in September 2015, OFMDFM launched a new shared learning initiative with the district councils, and 2 seminars have been held with them to date. The Good Relations Officer Conference is held annually, and the Good Relations Programme Board is held on a quarterly basis and provides another forum to share learning and good practice across and between departments. And the TBUC Engagement Forum, obviously, once operational, will provide another important mechanism for sharing on a much wider scale. To take it down to a more specific example, the summer camps pilot is another very positive example of shared learning, where we used the feedback from a range of stakeholders to inform the design for the very successful programme in 15-16 and for 16-17 going forward. In relation to district councils, 3.1 million has been awarded in 15-16 to the 11 district councils for the delivery of TBUC. And councils have added a further 1 million for their own resources, making the district council programme worth 4 million overall in 15-16. And the district council programme continues to make a significant contribution to the cultural expression priority of TBUC through tackling difficult issues around race and expressions of cultural identity in local communities. The programme is helping to build a level of tolerance and respect where the diversity of our cultural expression can be celebrated and embraced. Chair, those are just a couple of key issues and highlights in what was a very comprehensive report with quite a range, I think some 33 recommendations. We're happy to take any questions that the committee may have on any aspects of this.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll start, if I may, Mark, with some of the kind of structures of TBUC, the forum and the ministerial panel. I think we said we were very keen that the panel would meet, the ministerial panel would meet on a regular basis, and that there would be very transparent outcomes from those meetings. So can you tell us, first of all, how many times the panel has now met?
Yes, Chair. The ministerial panel has met on 2 occasions, in December 2013 and October 2014. Obviously, for a ministerial panel to take place requires the availability of all ministers. But alongside the ministerial panel meetings, there are regular meetings of the Good Relations Programme Board, which involves SROs for all the headline actions and other senior officials across all of the departments. In addition, we have the chairs of the thematic subgroups, which are the housing and community tensions, and they have met with junior ministers on 2 occasions to report progress on the work of the groups and to discuss future work plans. So there's a substantial architecture there of both boards overseeing progress of reporting and of reporting to both junior and OFMDFM ministers.
Okay, 2 meetings, December 13, October 14. In terms of December 13 and transparent outcomes, what were the outcomes of the first meeting?
Which I can't recall the specific outcomes of that. I mean, those meetings are there in order to. That was shortly after the overall TBUC programme was launched, and that would have been about getting the key headline actions in place and making sure that there was appropriate structures in place in departments. But I don't have the detail of something as far back as that. I'm afraid that predated my time by some years.
October 14.
Well, I would plead the same thing, Chair, in that we can get details of what was discussed at those meetings. But basically, that would have been about making sure the programme was being animated and was moving along.
I mean, I'm just referring back. We did say transparent outcomes as well as the actual meetings, and then to continue that architecture, as you say, we recommended that you give consideration in the department to an annual take note debate on the progress of TBUC. Has that happened? Has there been such a consideration within OFMDFM?
Can you just remind me of which recommendation that was, Chair?
There's a recommendation for a take note debate.
Sorry, the number, I mean.
Yep, 2 seconds.
Just, there's quite a lot of documentation here, just want to be able to get to the right point.
Number 3.
Number 3, right, okay. Yes, I think that was a multifaceted recommendation. It also included suggestion that there should be an annual report that should be made available, followed by a take note. I think what we're looking at is the development of an annual report, and we want to consider further with ministers what their views are on a take note debate following that. But we're positive about producing a report that would set out in broad terms what the achievements of progress have been around TBUC.
In terms of those 2 elements, then you're saying the report would come first, and then the take note debate may follow on.
I was assuming that was the intention behind the recommendation, that sequence, because that would be the substance of the.
Well, we think if you're going to do a report, which we think you should do, it would make sense then to debate it, rather than just put it straight in the library and risk it not being celebrated. So, in terms of the forum, should we be thanking you in the department for sight of the terms of reference?
I'm not sure I quite gather the
Should we be saying we
input behind the question.
requested the terms of reference on the 19th of November last, and as you say, we now have them. So should we be saying thank you for sending them to us?
Which are the
Let me put you out of misery, Mark. You didn't send them to us. We got them elsewhere. Not by subterfuge, but at least one member of staff, at least one other member of the committee went to a meeting perfectly properly. Interface Community Partners and Interagency Group Annual Conference last month, where the terms of reference were there for discussion.
the draft terms of reference
Yes,
were there for discussion. And
Should
part
they
of the
not come to us
process,
first?
which are part of the process for developing the terms of reference, and they're not finalised because they have to be agreed by ministers. And the appropriate time to bring them to the committee would be the point at which ministers had a clear view. But they were discussed with the community and voluntary sector as part of a CRC forum, and indeed the Deputy Chair was at that meeting and I was talking to him at the time. And there was a workshop at that time to get some feedback from those who were there to get their views on what was proposed, and that was fed back then into ministers. That was part of the process. So to provide a draft terms of reference that hadn't yet been worked through with the community and voluntary sector could have been somewhat premature.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but surely we see drafts of other proposals.
Yes, you do. What I'm saying in this case, we wanted to work them through with the community and voluntary sector, and then bring them through at a point when we've got the views of ministers on the terms of reference.
I'm a little confused because you will bring to us, for example, draft good relations indicators and ask us for our input, but on this case you're saying we don't want to show it to you until we've agreed it with the community sector.
What I'm saying is that there was a process that we were going through to try and develop the terms of reference to a point where it would make sense to share them with the committee and get the committee's input to them before they were finalised.
We recommended that perhaps the forum be chaired by a representative from the community and voluntary sector. Is that going to happen? Have you taken a view?
Sorry, Chair, I missed the question.
No. One of our recommendations was you consider whether this forum would be chaired by a member of the community and voluntary sector.
Yes.
Number 5.
Yep. Yes, we have been looking at that, and it would be our view that to show the extent of engagement that the department is having with the sector, and to demonstrate the department's commitment to that engagement, it would be more appropriate for a senior officer in the department to chair that group.
Why would that be?
Again, to demonstrate the commitment at a senior level to the whole process of listening, to hearing from the sector, and to engaging with the sector. But I think, in fact, the key thing is that that forum has there the community and voluntary sector representative that has the right sort of agenda that allows ideas to come from the sector and for us to communicate information to the centre, and it works effectively. Those are the most important things.
Well, what would you say to the counter-argument that if you really wanted to convince the sector that you valued them and you trusted their opinions, that you were going to let them chair?
Well, sure, you can argue this either way. I mean, people can have different perspectives. Our view would be that some of the information we were getting from the sector was that they wanted to see commitment at a senior level to engaging fully with the sector, and for that to be done directly. And so our proposal is that it should be chaired, in this case by myself, to demonstrate that we're listening closely to all that the community and voluntary sector say.
But I didn't realise it was you, and let me put on record.
Well, that's the proposal. The ministers have to confirm the detail of all this.
Well, obviously, I am not in any way trying to cast aspersions on your ability to chair, but then the voluntary community sector will turn up, they'll put the effort in, they will expect to see some sort of outcomes, and how are you going to ensure that there are transparent outcomes from the forum?
Well, as I mentioned, I think in my opening remarks, the CRC will produce, they're going to act as a sort of secretariat to the engagement forum, working with ourselves. They will produce a summary of the outcome of the discussions that occur at the forum, and that will be fed back into the department and made known to minister. It will also be copied around stakeholders.
And finally, how are you ensuring that all kind of significant sectors of the community are involved? Make sure that the rural community is involved, that women are represented?
Well, we're making the invitation to this as broad as possible, in the sense that this is the sector. It'll be a whole range of groups, and those who wish to come will be able to come and to input. Something we might want to look at going forward, and we'll do this in discussion, is as to where we should locate some of the hearings, as to whether or not they should be in Belfast or whether they should be outside Belfast. And again, this comes down to, we actually did have a brief discussion on this, but it can seem appropriate to move it around the province. Sometimes the actual transport routes for those who are coming are simpler to go to Belfast, but that will be part of the consideration that we'll have to make sure we get the full attendance.
If we can move on to the proposed Equality and Good Relations Commission. In your paper, which is page 92, members of our table pack, you've got a commitment there, a commitment to include an appropriate definition of sectarianism in the legislation. Can you give us an update on the legislation?
Well, the current position is that there's no agreement on the way forward on the legislation, and that the key outcomes and benefits that were envisaged through the legislation are being taken forward through close working between the CRC and through the Equality Commission in order to make sure the benefits that were envisaged will be brought through. In terms of the definition of sectarianism, I know the view was that this might be defined in any legislation that came forward, but we continue to work to the definition of sectarianism that is set out in the TBUC document, which is where sectarianism is defined as threatening, abusive or insulting behaviour or attitudes towards a person by reason of that person's religious belief or political opinion, or to an individual as a member of such a group.
And for the avoidance of doubt, Mark, you said there's no agreement on the way forward. Is that referring to the sector or to the department?
That's referring to ministers.
So if I were to ask you when you expect the legislation to come to the Assembly, you are not in a position to answer that. You mentioned your intention to develop multi-annual budgets and longer-term funding across the headline actions. Is that something that has been signed off, or is there no ministerial agreement on that?
Well, the whole issue of funding is one that we've been working very hard at, Chair, to try and improve, because we recognise the fact that groups want to have certainty as soon as possible so that they can plan, and that on some occasions we haven't been able to get allocations made as early as we would wish to for a whole range of reasons, including the necessary approvals. However, I'm very pleased to say that for this year we have already opened the Minority Ethnic Development Fund for the year coming. It's open already, opened on the 12th of February. The Central Good Relations Fund will open at the end of this month on the 29th of February. The District Council programme for next year opened for applications in January, and it closes at the end of February. The Summer Camps programme was announced by Minister at a very successful event they had in the Odyssey last Saturday, and will be open by the end of the month. And the North Belfast funding programme opened yesterday. So in terms of this incoming year, we have made great efforts, and we have been, I think, made very positive progress in having all of those funds open before the year. And I think that will give a lot of confidence to groups in the area. In relation to the other aspect of your question, which was about multi-annual budgets, ministers are keen that there can be multi-annual budgets, but obviously given the position we're in at the moment with a single year financial settlement, those multi-annual budgets really need to come in for the next spending review. And I think what will help with that is the commitment in the fresh start to the £60 million over 5 years, which will be available to help with creating the conditions that are necessary to bring down the interface barriers. So that will provide the basis for multi-annual budgets, and we are keen to get those in place to provide greater certainty. The other aspect, though, is that we also have to allow for the fact that you need to leave some flexibility in the system for new groups that may come forward and new ideas that may come forward. So you have to get the balance between given the certainty of multi-annual budgets, but leaving the flexibility to respond effectively to new ideas or new groups.
So when we bring in the multi-annual budget after this year, do you intend the multi-annual funding to be coterminal with that, or flexible up to 2, 3, 4 years, depending on the specifics of the pitch?
Well, we'll have to look at as I say, Chair, we haven't got into the detailed planning around this, but we'll have to get the balance between those projects that we know are producing good outcomes and we would want to support for a number of years, and others which perhaps we want to test. We want to fund for a period to see if they are successful, or indeed if the group is deliver them has the capacity to deliver effectively, and then make that into a longer term commitment. But the advantage of being in a 3-year funding settlement, which we'll be moving into, will be that we will have the capacity to do that, and it would be our intention to do that as far as we could.
And would you intend to be flexible? Because I could see a situation where perhaps some needs will be here for the medium to long term, and you might want to say that our multi-annual funding is open-ended insofar as we can make it so, but there might be other needs that you might think could reasonably be met within, say, 2 years, so you might only want to give 24 months commitment.
It will be a range of those things, Chair, but the flexibility is important. We have to balance flexibility against the certainty for the groups. And we also have to balance both those things against the need to spend the money in year on an annual basis. If you build flexibility in, there's a certain point in the year where you have to make a decision in order for the money to be capable of being spent in the year. So it's a complex enough process that we want to look at in detail. But we're certainly we are predisposed towards having greater certainty combined with that flexibility and allowing for multi-annual budgets.
Have you set up a funders coordination group, or are you considering that?
It's still being considered by ministers at present.
What would the main aim be?
Well, the main aim there would be to look at and to tie in with some of the research that we've been doing around and the review we've been doing with the various sources of funding that there are across the landscape. There are quite a number of different schemes, a number of different programmes. We want to look, and part of the review is helping us to do this, at just the extent to which they could maybe be streamlined and focus better on the outcomes and maybe be simplified to support groups in being funded, make it clearer for them in terms of the funding. So that would be the purpose of that subgroup.
Just before I bring in Alec Maskey, can I ask you about pilot projects? I think we consider it important that at the appropriate point you move from pilot to solid state, and perhaps some people feel we're not quite getting the momentum right. Yes,
I think there's always the balance. Again, I use the word balance. Always a balance and a judgment to be exercised around how innovative an approach is, and the extent to which it has been proven or demonstrated to be effective before you then would fund it in the longer term. There's also an issue about the extent to which a smaller project is capable of being scaled up to a fairly significant project, maybe be put on a region-wide basis, and those are sort of judgments that have to be taken. So we try to get that balance right. One of the examples, and Donald can give you a chapter and verse in the detail of this, would be around summer camps in terms of the pilot that we had there. There's also pilots going forward on United Youth that we would hope would inform future programmes. Do you want to say a little bit about summer camps, Donald?
As you know, last year was the pilot to deliver 100 summer camps in 2015. So that has been achieved. We delivered 101. But before we did it, throughout the process of the camps and then afterwards, as late as last Saturday, we've been evaluating what we've done, what's working well, what doesn't well with leaders and particularly with young people. We also have an independent evaluation of the programme being carried out by SIB. They've reported a midterm evaluation and the main report is due in February. But we've used all that information to inform what we're going to do in 2016-17. The ministers have agreed and launched on Saturday a programme for 16-17. So hopefully that, we still will need to modify slightly based on the learning again from 16-17, but all the indications are that it's meeting its outcomes, very positive feedback from both youth leaders and from the participants, the young people, and that it will now be mainstreamed. But as this is a one-year programme, we'll be able to make better informed decision when we go into the next programme for government.
There's also, Chair, worth mentioning, there was a hugely successful reunion event for the summer camp children, or young people I should say, last Saturday, attended by the junior ministers in the SSE arena. Some were up around 1,000 young people, were there from all over the region, all of them coming and renewing the friendships and so forth that they had made, and we had a number of giants were there and a number of local celebrities were there, and it was a really very successful event.
Yep, I've heard positive feedback. Has anything moved from pilot, just for information, from pilot to mainstream or solid state?
Well, the summer
Well, the
camps
summer
would be-
camps would now, but it looks as if because it's just a year, you can't say it's continued, but...
They are about to.
Yes, we'll have 1 year this year. We'll have a little bit more of co-design and feedback, and then the design should be ready to go in 17-18 as a mainstream.
And the United Youth pilot, due to end 31st March, we got correspondence from Public Achievement, although they appear to be off the scene now. They were concerned actually that the pilots were too short, stressing a June cut-off date would be a more natural endpoint and would allow the participants to achieve significantly greater outcomes. Does that chime with your experience?
Well, I'll make a few comments, and Donna knows the chapter and verse here because she was involved in the detail of this, but this came out of the blue in terms of the whole aspect of Public Achievement announcing the closure. There had been discussions with DEL, who are the parent department, around this normal accountability type meetings, and none of these issues had been raised, and then very suddenly it was announced that Public Achievement and Achieve Enterprises were going to be closing, which meant potentially that was it 40 young people? 44 young people were going to be left with nowhere to go, with no programme to go on to. So they were left very much high and dry, and it required very rapid intervention from ourselves, working with Dell and some other partners, and Donna was involved in the detail, and she can tell you, in order to be able to provide some ongoing programme for them, which has managed to be put in place. Do you want to say something more about that now?
So on Friday, the young people then were left. They didn't know what was going to be happening with the rest of their programme, albeit it is the programme that's running through to the end of March. But we were able to work with Dell, with ministers and with Corporation Ireland and the MAC to get the young people together on the Monday and a sort of a transition programme where their needs were identified, what was happening to their payments, because all their payments and stipends were going through the managing agent, and to keep them together, keep working on their project, because it was a youth-designed, youth-led project that they were working on, this pilot. And then Dell were able to appoint a new managing authority last Monday, and so the young people will now be under the care of Springboard Enterprises, who will take them through to the end of March.
So the young people who were involved in Public Achievement are still involved?
Yes.
And is it still called Public Achievement?
No, I can't remember.
Right.
There are separate names. There are two projects going on, and I just don't have the
Achieve
names.
Enterprises and
No, Lead
Public
and Be
Change.
the Change.
Oh, sorry, the programmes are called Lead and Be the Change.
Yeah.
Right.
And so they were being delivered through two partners, Public Achievement. And now, while they're off the scene now, those young people have been kept together, they've been working away over this past 2 weeks, and they're now working as normal under the auspices of Springboard.
And the management of Public Achievement, to be clear, you were saying gave you no prior warning that there were issues?
Well, the relationship was with Dell,
Dell, yeah.
but
they,
that's our information.
They gave Dell no advanced,
We're not aware of any advance notice. This came out of the blue.
and from what you're saying, both Dell and yourselves, once you became aware, were very active and keen to intervene.
Absolutely. We didn't want 44 young people not being able to get the stipend, not being able to get the support they wanted, and being put off a programme which they were enjoying and which seemed to be progressing well. So this decision seemed to be made, I don't know all the detail of it, but seemed to be made largely on a cash flow basis. There were particular problems, and that's what led the company to end the programme, but we didn't have much notice of it at all, and we had to intervene very quickly, and Donald and Dale worked very effectively to try and put something in place quickly with the other agency that turned out to be Springboard in the end, to make sure that there was some ongoing provision for them.
So have you been able to overcome that cash flow problem for them?
It wasn't our cash flow problem. This was a problem that the company had in terms of cash flow. And I think it reflected a range of other commitments that they had. It wasn't to do with specifically the United Youth Programme I'm aware of.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Alex, sorry I kept you.
Thank you, Chairman. No, 2 points really, Mark and the colleagues, and one of them actually goes on from an issue the chair raised himself. It's just in terms of really the budget, in terms of the multi-annual. I mean, I think I presume there'll be some projects and some initiatives which may be what I would call a job. So in other words, they'll say they'll do a piece of work, you should conclude within a year or 2 years or 3, and you would get maybe the funding for that. I presume that's the type of thing we're talking about. I mean, there'll be bound to be some initiatives or programs which might say that they will do a job and finish that job in a certain time, but there will be others which might be could go on for years. That's the type of money project you're looking at multi-annual funding for, I presume. Yeah.
That's right. Some things will be to do a specific task or complete a specific project. Others will be more like a program, an ongoing program, which is to deliver benefits to young people or others on an ongoing basis. So you would keep those.
Yeah. The second point for me, and it is kind of in a way a budget as well, but because you were saying earlier on about the balance between trying to make sure you get the money spent and work done. But say, for example, you would imagine if this programme becomes more profiled and more successful, hopefully, then that in itself is bound to generate more interest. And maybe people may think, God, I should be maybe doing something about that, or can I input in that? So I'm trying to find out in my own mind if groups or organisations, could be businesses, could be local community organisations, could be a whole range of people thinking we should be doing something about that as well. So how might a new initiative or a new group start to get an input into or an access? Where would it go to, for example? What would you say to somebody out there who thinks I should be contributing to taking those barriers down? Here's what I am doing currently at the moment. How can I input in that?
Yeah, well,
is there an access point, or is there?
I suppose it would depend on the programme. If it's in terms of accessing funding, these are open calls, and there'll be an opportunity for the groups to put in an application, which is then goes through the process, so they can set out what they would like to do, and that will be assessed against outcomes and against the criteria, and then they will either receive or not receive funding. The other aspect, I'm not sure if this is what you were getting at. Would be, are there those in local community who would want to contribute to some of the issues? And that would be a question of engaging with the actual community group or project on the ground.
Well, I was a wee bit surprised from some of the evidence section. Some people are asking, like, well, you need to tell us what sectarianism is, and I found that a bit strange, particularly from people who are working lifelong in some of this work, not questioning their integrity, but I just thought it was an unusual kind of a point, but it's a lesson nevertheless. Just trying to work out that there are, like, the reason why the committee wanted to have like an annual report and the debate and so on, to kind of keep putting profile on all this, wasn't just about accountability, it was also to highlight the work going on. So what I'm saying is that as this work continues on, gets more of attention, public awareness grows around it, there might be people who think that they should be inputting into that who maybe currently aren't. Now, obviously, such reports and the community, the engagement forum is bound to be all helping in that process. Just trying to work out, some people might decide next month or a year down the line, God, I should be inputting in that as an organisation. Who to go to? Because we all know what T-Book is. A lot of people out there might know, part of the people who are working on your programmes who know it, but there'll be people outside that who don't know the jargon. What does it really mean?
Well, I think part of what we were doing, you mentioned the engagement forum, and part of our ongoing work through CRC, so it would be to get the message out about what T-Book is about, what the aims are. I think it's also important when programmes are being taken forward that they are branded as T-Book. I mean, branding is important to get the recognition of what the programme actually is, and then beyond that, what it's trying to achieve, so that people can get a better understanding of what it is. We also work, of course, across a range of departments. This is not all about extra money. I mean, every local council has a good relations duty. All public bodies have a good relations duty. So there's an opportunity for the full range of bodies to engage in different ways with those that they are working with, and those indeed who are working in those organisations to again get the message out, and to identify ways in which people can. The local councils do a good relations audit every 3 years. Of all their activities, which feeds into then their annual action plans. And that would be another way in which they can pick up issues, pick up groups that perhaps maybe haven't been inputted to date or would wish to input.
It's just, sorry, Chair, just the last wee point. I mean, it's just that I do think that there does need to be a branding and an ongoing double work around that, because just using an example, I've met a number of people there very recently. I did a wee bit of a challenge in the meeting because I was saying those in the room were all working at different levels within the broader community and doing some obviously very, very good work. But nobody had actually taken on the vision. And the point I was putting, okay, well, how do you want to see, and in this case it was people in Belfast, I say, well, in this case, what does anybody in this room want to see Belfast looking like in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? We need to work back on that. That means we do want a shared space, yeah, we do want to get rid of barriers. Well, how do you start doing that? So people were actually more focused on what their little bit is, which is very important, but it's trying to get the reminder that there's a bigger vision and a bigger responsibility.
Just, I recognise where you come from on the bigger vision, and hopefully the engagement forum will help us to inform that vision. But at sort of at a middle level, we're organising workshops for the Central Good Relations Fund and for the summer camps before people apply, to explain what they're about. So it's not a summer camp that's just maybe to look after the young ones during the holidays, that good relations are at the heart of it, that is about building sustainable relationships, and the same in Central Good Relations. So letting people know what the aims of it are, and then they can bring their ideas to the workshops as well. Well, would this be appropriate? How could I get involved in it? So that's at a practical level.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Deputy Chair, Crystal.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your presentation and update today. So Together Building a United Community is the Northern Ireland Executive Strategy for improving community relations across Northern Ireland. Can I ask why, therefore, there has only been 2 ministerial panel meetings in almost 3 years of the strategy?
Well, Vice Chair, There have been the 2 meetings with First and Deputy First, and with the range of ministers. It is difficult to get the full ministers together, but the important thing here is not so much simply the meeting of the ministerial panel. It's about the overall programme and the extent to which this programme is being taken forward. I mean, there are the 10 headline actions. There's some £17 million spent this year on good relations. There's further money in Fresh Start identified going forward for work in this area. There is a Good Relations Programme Board. There are grade 3s across all departments engaged in the Good Relations Programme Board taking forward programmes. So there is a fairly extensive architecture there. There are a whole range of programmes, and there is an extensive series of programmes and projects being taken forward. So this is a priority for the executive, and the ministers have indicated clearly that TBUC is a priority. It's simply been the logistical difficulties in getting those meetings together. But we are looking to have a further meeting of the ministerial panel, and we would hope that we might be able to get that in the reasonably near future. But this doesn't indicate any lack of progress, and I think we've evidenced the wide range of programmes and activities that are being taken forward under TBUC, which are engaging very significant numbers of young people and people right across Northern Ireland.
Okay, I appreciate your response. I think 2 meetings in 3 years and no meeting in 16 months is going to be open to interpretation in terms of prioritisation of this amongst the ministers concerned. In terms of the TBUC forum, Together Building a United Community Forum, you say that the forum is scheduled to meet in March the 10th, 2016. So how has the membership been appointed, and can you give us any rough idea of membership of the forum, or provide us with some?
Well, our intention is
details?
this would be very broad. That it will be the whole it's for the sector, so that the invitations will go out to a very wide range of those community involvement groups. And we'll be doing this through the CRC, so the CRC will know those who are active in the sector. What we'll have to see is how many of those groups respond to that and come. I mean, we could be talking about several hundred. But we'll have to see just what the response to this actually is. But it is a broad stakeholder. We're not confining this to a small number of the larger groups or anything like this. This is a broadly based forum that we're trying to take forward, but we'll have to see just how well it works.
Well, I think it's to be welcomed. It was obviously a committee recommendation, and I wish you well with that. I would personally have concerns that it would be best for a chair to come from a community and voluntary or other sector organisation, but I welcome the fact that the forum is in place. Can I ask, however, the strategy itself obviously touches on a wide range of issues: children and young people, education, housing, etc. So how is the forum going to, or how will the forum include representatives from education, schools, housing, even business, for example?
Well, I'd say the invitations will be broad. We will engage with those on the Good Relations Programme Board, for example, to ensure, and they come from across those range of departments that you've just referred to make sure that they're aware that this is happening. And our intention is to have a thematic type approach to these kinds of discussions. So we will be talking about the issues affecting young people at the first forum, particularly looking at the good relations indicators, looking at the attitudes that are displayed there, the fact that many young people seem to be less positive about the future than adults, and trying to get some sense from those who are there as to what would be the factors that might be driving those sorts of thoughts and behaviours, because when we get the information from the surveys, we don't always know what actually is underlying it, and a key part of getting some sense of those driving factors and those issues will be to ask the community and voluntary sector, who are much closer to what's actually happening on the ground. So this will be very much an opportunity for them to tell us what is actually happening on the ground, what the impact are of the various policies, how they might be better improved, sharing some best practice, an opportunity for us as well to get across to the sector what the aims of TBUC are and what our various programmes are, so that it increases their awareness of what we're trying to achieve. So it's intended very much to be a two-way discussion, but also an opportunity for them to tell us what's it really like on the ground out there, and what impact are our programmes having or not having in some areas.
Okay, and another recommendation from the committee was for an annual report and a take note debate. I think you in your submissions you have said that you have accepted all the recommendations, if I'm not wrong. So when can we expect to see an annual report, given, as I say, we're almost 3 years into the strategy?
Well, I mean, we are 3 years into what's a fairly significant strategy, and obviously it'll take time. It takes time to build the impact of a strategy, and we have reported regularly here to the committee on how those projects and programmes are being taken forward. So there has been reporting to the committee, but the intention would be that the logic of an annual report is that it should tie in with the revision of the good relations indicators, and it would try and look to see how they are changing, what that is telling us, what progress has been made over the year in the programmes we're delivering, and try and look at what the underlying issues and factors are. So it would be later in the autumn those indicators, September, that those indicators come out. So that would be our intention, to try and bring those two together rather than having them coming out at different times. It would seem a bit illogical to have them at separate times.
So you hope to have the first annual report in September of this year then?
Well, the good relations indicators, are they published in September? So we'd want to include them in. So it would be sometime shortly after September, so we can analyse those and include some thoughts about that, along with an update on our various programmes.
And I know the chair has asked this, but will that be brought to the Assembly for a take note debate on the report?
Well, that's something that we're in discussion with ministers on, and we'll come back on.
Okay. Another key aspect of Together Building United Community was the proposal for the creation of Equality and Good Relations Commission, and flowing from that, an enhanced Equality and Good Relations impact assessment for all government policy. There's obviously been delay in that legislation, but is there any update, and how detrimental to ensuring improved good relations has the absence of an enhanced Equality and Good Relations impact assessment been?
Well, I think I mentioned, or I said to the Chair that there's not currently agreement on the way forward on that. But what we have agreed is that the CRC and the Equality Commission should work closely together, and they have been meeting to do that, to try and ensure there's effective working to try and achieve the same outcomes as might have been achieved through an EG RC. In terms of the overall impact on TBUC more generally, I don't think it's having a significant impact on TBUC. The programmes being taken forward, the projects and programmes are in delivery, and the whole process of equality impact assessments and so forth are being taken forward in the normal way across all public bodies. So
That's the problem. Together by the United Community recommended that it be enhanced from an equality impact assessment to an equality and good relations impact assessment, and most of the departments are saying that that won't happen, that won't be created until an Equality and Good Relations Commission is created. So if that is not going to happen, is there some way for OFMDFM to initiate the Equality Commission or other body to look at the creation of an Equality and Good Relations impact assessment?
Well, in terms of good relations across departments, I've already mentioned that most departments are represented on our Good Relations Programme board and are taking forward activities across this area. Some of them are very active. The SD, for example, and the Northern Ireland Housing Executive would be very active in the whole good relation area. At the local council level, there's a good relations duty. And as I mentioned earlier, there are audits and there are plans drawn up in relation to those audits that are taking place around good relations. So there's very significant activity taking place in respect of good relations across both departments at central and at local government level.
Okay, that's two quick questions, Chair. So yeah, in relation to some of the programmes, then the summer camps, do we know how many young people have participated in summer camps?
I think Donna could probably give you the names of everyone who was on it. Donna, would you like to
Give you
say a little bit about that?
4,200.
room here.
A new role. 4,200 young people went through the camp.
Okay, and you said that there had been positive outcomes. Can you give us an idea of what some of those outcomes are?
Well, the aims of it were to affect positive attitudinal change towards young people, towards people from different backgrounds. And while we don't have final formal statistical analysis back from SIB, the feedback from the young people and from the leaders, I think is so strong. They're saying things like to us, that they're so aware that they misjudge people if you don't get to know them. I'm not as afraid to meet new people as I was. That anecdotal for me is very strong. But again, the willingness of over or almost 1,000 young people to come back on a Saturday morning and afternoon to meet up with their friends that they met, and they're all so pleased whenever ministers announced that we're going to run the programme next year. And the feedback on Twitter, which I'd never done before, is just amazing about what a good time they had and how good it was to see each other. And that's about sustainable relationships with people that have never had the opportunity to engage and meet before.
Sounds like the type of information that would be useful to have in an annual report then. Yeah, I look forward to seeing that. In terms of the United Youth Programme, do you know how many people have participated in that? I recall Junior Minister Bell at the time of creation stating there would be 10,000.
I think there's a longer term ambition for that sort of a figure. In terms of the pilots, there's 12 lead organisations, and the pilot activity is being delivered to 365 young people. And those pilots are there obviously to test the concept, to test the process so that it can be scaled up. And we're working currently with Dell and with DFP to take forward an initiative under the Peace Programme that will help to deliver the outcomes that are envisaged under United Youth. So that would be the means through which this would be scaled up, but there's still quite a significant amount of work to do around that.
I have a colleague who says we're in danger of having more pilots than Ryanair in some of these programmes, but can you tell us what the key difference between a pilot and becoming mainstream will be in reality?
Well, the purpose...
Other airlines are available.
Yes, most definitely.
Well, I mean, the purpose of a pilot is to test a concept, to test processes and procedures, to get feedback on how the people who are the participants of a programme either find it in terms of is it meeting their needs, to test whether it's getting the outcomes before you start putting in significant amounts of public money to scale it up. I mean, were we to go immediately to a full-scale programme and whether to be issues that emerged, I think I'd be very quickly in front of this committee being asked why I hadn't had an appropriate pilot. So this is all part of evidence-based approaches to, or evidence-informed approaches to policy making and delivery. Now, I take the Chair's point that we have to make sure that we scale up at an appropriate time and with an appropriate pace, and that's what we are looking at. But I think it's important to get this right and to make sure that we're clear about what we're doing, and the people who are delivering it also have to learn from the pilot so that when it's scaled up they are in a position they have the capacity to deliver the programme effectively. So it's only fair on those who are delivering, it's only fair on those who are participating, and it's only right for public funds that we should pilot first and then scale up.
Do you have any concern that OFMDFM could develop a reputation for numerous pilots, some of which have worked well, in fairness? I think of the literacy and numeracy programme in delivering social change, but then not being able to see the mainstreaming of that type of pilot. Do you think there's a danger of a reputation developing in that regard?
Am I concerned about OFMDFM's reputation?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot, there are a lot of projects that are developed and delivered in that way. Is there a danger that, an opinion could be formed that it's as much about being able to say and point to, actions that don't actually have the scale of impact that we need them to have at some point?
Well, I think that this comes back to the nature of the sort of programmes that OFMDFM is taking forward. I mean, and we're going to have a session on DSC next, I think, so maybe we can pick that point up then. Yeah. But I mean, clearly what we're trying to do is to identify new approaches to things which will then be rolled out by other departments. And what we are doing in the main, and the amount of funding we have, while it may appear large, is not large in overall public expenditure terms. So what we're trying to do is to test new approaches and test approaches that are capable of changing systems and processes, can be transformational in that way, in order that they would be picked up by other departments and mainstream through. And the way we try to make sure that they will be carried on through is by involving the departments and our involving stakeholders, young people, in the co-design of those, so that they are engaged from the outset and that carries through. And we've learned a lot of lessons. And the whole point with trying some of these new things is that you get some things right and other things you don't get right. And we've learned lessons from delivering social change and indeed from TBUC in terms of how best to take these things forward. But we mentioned the summer camps, they're going to be scaled up. The United Youth, there's a process for taking that forward through the peace programme. So I don't think that reputation, if it did exist, would be fair.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Welcome. Alex Edward.
You said earlier, Mark, that the forum would help answer the question, if you like, what's it really like out there, was the words that you used. I did an event in this building 3 weeks ago. All the parties were represented, 44 A-level students from across the city. It was one of these interactive events, and 90% said they didn't think they had a job, 87% didn't have any confidence in our politics, and 50% said they wanted to leave. And whilst that's a small snapshot,
We'll meet in our after.
during, but in response to all the parties, if that could be the message that we might get back from the forum, especially from younger people in the forum, that's the scale of how they see things. Could I acknowledge that the applications for the various funding programmes are out, but the real issue is not when the applications open, although that's welcome that it's early or earlier. The real issue is when will decisions be made. So, for example, in respect to the summer schemes and the North Belfast programme, when will decisions be made so that people out there know with certainty what the funding might be available, when the funding might be available?
Well, Donna will have the detail, but I mean the key point for us is that this is a process. So getting the applications open, getting the whole process started at an early stage is a key part of allowing an earlier decision to be made. So it is important to pull that forward, and we have managed to do that. In all of these, there's a process to be gone through in terms of criteria and assessment and so forth, and then allocations. And some of this, and a large part of this, is down to the volume of the applications, the quality of the applications, how quickly we can get them assessed, and then the clarity over funding and allocations. So it's hard to be precise about decisions, but we'd certainly hope that decisions would be made early in the year. Now,
Early in the year, and the funding dates, the application dates haven't closed, so we're going to be later than earlier in the year, and you don't want to crash into, for example, the summer in relation to some of the funding. So is there any indicative?
we would hope that in relation certainly to the summer camps, we would be given clear indications to the Education Authority, who are the lead partner in this, that they would be of the clarity of what is possible there, and plenty of time for them to be able to take forward the arrangements and for the groups to make their preparations. I can't give you a precise date, but I would hope it would be very soon after, or very soon into the new financial year, that these decisions would be taken. And certainly it will be in advance of where we have been before.
I recognise that the application has been open across the range of programmes is better than we were before, but the processes, the internal mechanisms, the checking and all that, just needs to be ensured that the decisions are earlier rather than later, otherwise you end up in a rock and a hard place. You mentioned the £60 million identified in Fresh Start over 5 years for a particular intervention. Could you update the committee about where OFMDFM is and DFP is in relation to that funding stream, in terms of scoping it out, in terms of what interventions, like where is that programme? It's a headline at the moment in Fresh Start. Why has that been taken forward now? Because
well, essentially that funding is the TBUC funding. That 12 million a year for 5 years is setting out what will be available for the wider range of programmes to create the conditions that would allow progress to be made in taking down the physical barriers that there are. So that is the broader TBUC agenda, because as I mentioned in the opening remarks, the only way these barriers will be capable of being taken down, or indeed where there aren't barriers, where we get into contested spaces and so forth, the only way we're going to get past those kinds of issues, or help to get past those issues, is by creating the right conditions and confidence in the community. So that funding is really for the wider TBUC agenda, and represents an increase on what our budget was in this current year.
so it's funding around the programmes that are currently available, not to have new interventions.
Well, there is an increase because our budget this year was 10 million for TBUC, so this would increase it to 12 million. So there is increased funding there that will allow some new interventions to be taken forward.
And that's available this year?
It's available in the coming year, yeah. 16-17.
16-17.
Yeah.
In relation to the forum and this question about participants looking to a senior official to chair in order to, as you know, that's not necessarily where the committee was thinking, but I do think that this is some time when a joint chair should be considered. Like, I presume it was ministers who said that they didn't want an external chair, and whilst I had preferred that, and given the scale of people that you're talking about, you mentioned 700 people be involved in some way or other, it does seem to me that if ministers are not prepared to go down the way of an external chair, which I think is preferable, then this is a case where there needs to be joint chairs in order to have that wider sense of ownership. And you might want to consider that or reflect that back to ministers.
Absolutely, I'm quite happy to we will of course review the operation of the forum, and if we find there are better ways of doing it, we'll be quite happy to look at that.
But can I ask you the question that has been touched upon by a number of members? Is there not a tension between the sector looking to commitment at an official level, forum, even to the point of having it chaired. Is there not a tension between that and the failure to have a panel meeting in 16 months? So on one hand, there's going to be this demonstration of commitment through ministers, it seems, appointing you to chair the forum, and at the same time, ministers at a panel level acknowledge the other architecture that you refer to, ministers at a panel level not meeting for 16 months.
Well, in terms of the sort of commitment from ministers, I mean, that is demonstrated through the departmental programmes that each of their departments and the grade threes on their behalf are taking forward. There are also regular reports to and meetings with junior ministers who have a significant role to play in this whole area and have taken a very prominent role. And both junior ministers were at, for example, the reunion event last Saturday. But a key part of the forum is about getting the message out. I mean, Mr. Maskey mentioned the extent to which people are aware of TBUC and what it's trying to do. Part of this is getting the message out to those who maybe aren't receiving it or have only received a part of the message, so there's greater clarity about what we're trying to achieve under TBUC and what role they may play. But it's also then getting back the views about the problems that the community groups are facing and whether they understand the policy, or whether they think the policy works for them and how it might be improved. So it's getting that two-way flow. I think that's important.
That did neatly sidestep the question. But I recognise that there seems to be, in some places around TBUC, new levels of commitment, like the appointment or nomination of you, even whilst I might differ about that approach, by ministers to chair the forum is an example of that. But the point is, on one hand, there seems to be good authority demonstrated by putting a senior official in to chair a body. At the same time, another body is meeting. And I think there is a demonstrable tension that could raise questions. Thank you.
David Michael.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll try and keep this reasonably quick. But it's actually touching on one of the points, I think the initial point that Mr. Atwood raised. I knock a lot of doors in my constituency, and I would say between 1 and 15, 1 and 20, the person on the other side of that door gives me a very long list of woes about Northern Ireland and all the things that are going wrong and all the things that need fixed and how terrible life is in general. And I always ask them the same question. I ask it respectfully, and I say, well, can you tell me how you're worse off today than you were this time last year or the year before? And if you are, then let's talk about something practically maybe that we can do to help that. And I have to say, of all the people I've spoke to, and we're in the thousands now, it's not hundreds, only one has come back and said, well, I lost my job last year and I'm struggling to find something else. Now, maybe that's just that one person, and we were able to try and give them some help. And I think in relation to the point that I'm trying to get to here is that if I was to walk into a debate off Civilian Street into this place sometimes, I wouldn't exactly leave uplifted. I wouldn't leave particularly encouraged by a lot of the things of what I'm hearing in here. But whenever you actually go out into the real world again, you realise that when compared to a year ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago, things are actually improving and they're getting better, and Northern Ireland is a much more hopeful place to live than it used to be, even from the days when I would have been in my youth and growing up. So I guess what I want to try and understand is, within these programmes, and I'm conscious they are not the platform for motivational speakers or anything like that, but what aspect of these programs, what thought is given to instilling hope in the people who are becoming part of them? Because I think unless we once and for all take these shackles of victimhood off us, and I'm talking about all of us across the board, because we all have our stories to tell of how we've been victims of bad things, and I know some have been victims of horrible things, but we all kind of have at times have that attitude. And I'm just wondering, how do we inspire this next generation to not be weighed down by those same shackles that perhaps the previous generation has been? And is there provision within these programs to actually deal with that in a very meaningful way? Because when we talk about transparent outcomes, if one of those outcomes was a hopeful, optimistic, positive next generation, that instead of wanting to, I guess, defend Northern Ireland or attack Northern Ireland, but actually just wants to work for Northern Ireland, then surely that in itself would be something that would be extremely optimistic and extremely welcome. So I just want to try and understand what is being done to make that happen.
Okay, I'll give you an outline, and Donna will have detail. If you look at the broad outcomes that we're trying to achieve from TBUC, and they're reflected in the good relations indicators, around, for example, our children and young people, the key two outcomes there are improved attitudes between young people from different backgrounds, and secondly, that they're engaged in bringing the community together. So those are the outcomes. And all these outcomes are built into the programmes. The outcome-based accountability that we are putting in place for these programmes means you have to set out the outcomes, how you're going to achieve them, and then measure whether you achieve them. If you look at the shared community, the key objectives there, or the outcomes that are sought, are increased use of shared spaces, and a shared space is accessible to all. If you look at safe community, the key outcomes are a reduction in hate crime and intimidation, and a community where places and spaces are safe for all. And then we go to cultural expression, an increased sense of community belonging, and secondly, that cultural diversity is celebrated. So those are the key outcomes that we're trying to get from across the TBUC programme, and that's what those indicators measure. And that's what we update year on year. And we haven't yet got a timeline of those, but we know that they can be that there are differences. That young people tend to be less positive with some of those things than older people, and that maybe reflects the fact that those who are older have lived through some of the experiences. Those who are younger only understand life as it is now and wonder why it can't be better. But that again is part of the discussion we want to have with the young people at the community and voluntary group at the engagement forum. In terms of inspiring, part of the whole reunion event last Saturday, as well as getting young people together, encouraging them to renew relationships and so forth, was to have some local role models there that could help provide a bit of glitz as well as a wee bit of inspiration. So we had Craig Gilroy from Ulster Rugby was there. He was up and he was being interviewed about his experiences of meeting with teams from across the world and how the cultures were different, and he talked about that. We had Paddy Barnes and Michael Conlon talking about their experience, what they wanted to achieve in life, and the fact that they wanted to get the gold medals at the next games. And we had the Belfast Giants were there as well, mingling with the crowd. So there was a mixture in that event, both of getting together, renewing relationships. They had TBUC hoodies that had been made available to them, and they wore them again. And that is part of the branding. It's part of the sense of being part of a wider movement. And the whole purpose of that reunion was to give the sense that while the young people may have gone to summer camps, individual summer camps, there may have been 20 people there, 15, 30, whatever. That's part of a wider process and a wider programme. So there was 1,000 of them came together, and they could see all the other young people who were engaged in that. So that's part of what we're trying to do around it. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add.
Well, I've maybe used it before, but the example, I've got great hopes for the United Youth Programme, and that's the aim to put 10,000 young people through United Youth Programme. And we have the pilots that are being delivered through Dell at the moment. But in the pilot that we operated before that with Springboard, of the 50 participants, 94% went into training, employment or further education. And I think something like 85% came away with a more positive attitude towards the other community, towards their own personal development. So just young people tell us, and we've engaged with a lot of forum for young people, that they don't want to be talking about the past, the horrible things. They want to be talking about their futures, their jobs, and better outcomes for the whole of the community, not just themselves. And I think Mark mentioned North Talks too, but there was a parallel process with young people from Shankill, Cliftonville and Lower Old Park and in the Girdwood Hub. And the young people went in and worked with the architects and the people there to inform what it would look like, what the flooring would look like. They went out and engaged with their cohorts or their peers in the community to say, come and see this, you can be part of this. So that I think in 2011, 60% of people in that area thought that the Girdwood would be a shared community hub. But by 2014 that had increased to 80% and it opened just a fortnight ago, and hopefully we'll go on to see those figures actually in reality as we go forward. So I mean, we are doing a lot of work with young people, but they are feeding into us what they want to do, and we need to respond to that.
I mean, they're also feeding into in terms of legacy, you know, under the cross-community sports programme, which was targeted at identifying young leaders in the community who would then go on to play an important role. So it's just not about taking young people for a very short period of time and then walking away from them. It's then looking to those young people to carry that work on, carry it ahead. And one of the things that we would hope coming out of the United Youth Programme is that those young people would then perhaps go on to play a role within summer camps or potentially within the cross-community sports programme.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of the sports stars, Mark, were they asked not just to talk about their successes, but also handling defeat, failure, knockbacks?
Well, I think the key theme was in this was about their hopes and aspirations. So it would have picked up aspects of those setbacks, but also it was about meeting people from different backgrounds and responding to people from different backgrounds, and how, despite the fact that people come from different cultures, different countries, there's a lot of commonality, and it was those sort of themes that they were trying to bring out in some of the discussions. But the interviews went just whatever way they went, in the sense that Pete Snodden was from is it Downtown Radio? Or?
Cool FM.
Right, Cool FM, shows you how I'm not cool. So, Cool FM was comparing this, and so
Radio 4 man, Mark.
Yes.
Well, one of the young boxers did actually talk about, you know, facing, you know, the potential of defeat and not winning all the time, and how he dealt with that. So it wasn't entirely, you know, it wasn't.
Unfortunately, it doesn't happen too often. They're
No, it didn't.
doing very well.
Not to them.
He didn't dwell on it. I
Our
have to
boxers don't seem to know.
Okay. Well, Donna, Grania, and Mark, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chair.
But, Mark's going for the heavy lifting title, aren't you?
Well, I've got another file here, Chair, under the chair.
Okay. Members, do you mind if I offer Mark a tea or coffee if he wants one?
I'm fine.
You sure?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Fine.
Okay, members, before we go into that second briefing, we had asked statutory committees for an update on any scrutiny they had undertaken in respect of good relations and TBUC, and we have had responses, and those responses are in your table pack at page 119, and that is just for your information. So next, it's an update on delivering social change. In your packs, you've got a clerk's brief at page 257. OFMDFM's letter on the 3 new signature programmes is at page 261. The committee report on delivering social change, the executive summary and the recommendations, that is, are on page 263. Another OFMDFM letter on DSC, this one dated 2nd of July 2015, is page 267. Another letter on the Odyssey Parenting Your Teens response is at page 274. And another letter from the Ministers on the Literacy and Numeracy Signature Programme is at page 280. And finally, a briefing paper and a series of scorecards were received at 12:19 yesterday, and they're necessarily entabled at page 176. And members, I will not speak for you, but I would just like to say, I mean, the debate went on to 11:30 last night. I'm sure members were very busy this morning. I have not been through the scorecards. I've not been through all these papers. And you will understand there is a danger that at some future date, if you criticise, somebody might come back and say, but they were in your papers for your meeting that day. I am just putting on record that I have not read those papers, because protocol is 5 days' notice.
I say there's more than a danger, Chair. I think there's probably a guarantee.
Well, so we welcome back Dr. Mark Brown, as if he's never been away, and he's joined now by Joe Reynolds from the department. And Mark, yourself again.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to DSC, the committee will be aware that this is the executive's delivery framework set up to address the impact of poverty and social exclusion. The framework seeks to coordinate key actions across government departments with a view to delivering a sustained reduction in poverty and associated issues across all ages, to improve children and young people's health, well-being and life opportunities, and to break the long-term cycle of multi-generational problems. Delivering social change represents a new level of joined-up working by ministers and senior officials across executive departments to drive through initiatives which would have a meaningful impact. The committee will be aware that there are 3 major programme elements associated with the DSC delivery framework. First of all, the Social Investment Fund. Secondly, the development and implementation of signature programmes. And thirdly, the delivery of childcare and TBUC strategies. In terms of today's briefing, Chair, we will focus around the implementation and evaluation of the signature programmes. You will recall that the First and Deputy First Minister announced in October 2012 the development of the 6 significant signature programmes with a potential budget of some 26 million. These programmes place an emphasis on the needs of children, young people and their families, and specifically sought to tackle issues such as improving literacy and numeracy levels, family support and pathways to employment for young people. Lead departments were identified as being responsible for the development and delivery of each of the signature programmes, with OFMDFM overseeing the implementation and evaluation. Chair, I can advise that all the central funding commitments for the initial 6 programmes have now been met. In terms of the specific work undertaken for each of the programmes, through the Literacy and Numeracy Scheme, over 18,000 primary and post-primary children have received additional support in understanding maths and English. Around 400 primary school children were supported by way of the Nurture Units programme. Almost 6,000 families have been referred to family support hubs. These are coalitions of community and voluntary organisations and agencies which provide early intervention services at a local level. And over 700 families have been supported through a suite of parenting support programmes, which sees the provision of additional high-quality support to new and existing parents living in areas of deprivation. The social enterprise incubation hubs have delivered over 100 social enterprises, which either started up as a new business or began test trading, and 75 new jobs have been created within these businesses. And finally, 720 families completed participation on the Community Family Support Programme, which sought to help young people not in education and training and their families. Lead departments have begun formal evaluations of the initial 6 signature programmes. They're undertaking an outcomes-based approach to this evaluation process, and more detailed reports on particular projects are anticipated in due course. Significant work has been done to pilot this outcome-based accountability, or OBA, methodology, and some of the learning from this is already evidenced in improvement to more recent programme reporting. So we're trying to roll this whole approach out beyond OFMDFM, beyond DSC and into departments. Regarding the potential continuance and future financing of the programmes by the lead departments, when the initial announcement was made by the First and Deputy First Minister in October 2012, departments were made aware that these central funds allocated to each lead department should be very much viewed as seed funding, and that it would be for those lead departments subsequently to mainstream the programmes within departmental budgets should projects be deemed to have been successful. This is beginning to happen. For example, the Education Minister has agreed to fund a legacy programme which aims to harness the success of the Literacy and Numeracy signature programme by way of sharing the innovative learning and the best practice that was identified across the school system. With regard to the remainder of the programmes, the Nurture Units, Family Support Hubs, Parenting Support, Community Family Support and Social Enterprise Hubs, they're all are well placed to attract ongoing support in some form after March 2016 by way of funding sourced by the lead departments. When these initial 6 signature programmes were first developed, it was intended that they would make a real difference to the lives of some of our most vulnerable children, young people and their families. Whilst the formal evaluation and the associated statistical evidence are still awaited, and in some cases may take some time to see, we've been reassured by the positive feedback from both those involved in delivery of these programmes, as well as some of the children, young people and families who have benefited from the services that have been provided. Following on from the initial 6 programmes, the 6 signature programmes, a small number of other signature programmes have since been announced. In September 14, the First and Deputy First Minister announced the development of 3 further signature programmes which focused on dementia, early intervention and shared education. And each of these 3 programmes was co-funded along with Atlantic Philanthropies. Project boards have been established for each of these projects, and the early implementation stage of these programmes is being monitored through a Delivering Social Change Atlantic Philanthropies Programme Board. The formal evaluations of the initial 6 signature programmes are ongoing. Lead departments are undertaking the outcome-based approach I referred to earlier, and more detailed reports on particular projects are anticipated in due course. As with the initial 6 signature programmes, lead departments are adopting an outcomes-based approach to the further programmes that were announced under Atlantic Philanthropies. And finally, and in line with the Programme for Government Commitment, OFMDFM is currently undertaking an internal evaluation of the learning and the lessons of the Delivering Social Change framework. And it's hoped that these evaluation findings will be available in the near future. Chair, that's a quick run through what is a fairly significant programme. I hope the committee's found that useful. Joe and I are happy to take any questions as best we can. We did provide the outcome-based accountability scorecards at the committee's request. I appreciate that it would have been helpful to have a longer time to look at them. They are very, very detailed, and I think it might be more valuable to the committee if we actually undertook to provide some sort of a summary of those cards, because they are very detailed on each individual project. They run some, I couldn't tell you how many pages, but there are multiple pages there, and there's a lot of detail actually within them.
Well, the table papers for members, which obviously came out after you submitted afternoon yesterday, runs to hundreds of pages.
Yeah.
So it's not a point I'm going to pursue today, Mark, but we had big difficulties with late delivery of papers. We took it to the head of the civil service. We got a spike in performance. We've slipped back again. I just think as part of our legacy we will be just alerting the new committee in the next mandate not to let it happen.
Sorry, Chair, may I just make a comment? I understand that in relation to this. I actually think if we had a discussion about the nature of the information, we could have provided you perhaps with more summary information that the committee would have found more accessible and helpful. The actual scorecards themselves are so detailed that I'm not sure they would be of value at this stage.
Actually, I've got to say I do find them helpful, but it does take time.
It does.
And I'm not going to bang on about this specific because I think there is a bigger piece at play. Mark, I want to ask you about the first 6 and then 3. Yeah?
Yeah.
There's a Bermuda Triangle here. What about play and leisure, the 7th of the first tranche?
Yes, there is also, sorry Chair, you're quite right, there is also a signature programme on play and leisure, the 7th.
So what's the update on it?
Play and leisure, when it was announced, didn't have any budget associated with it due to the pressures that there were around it. So it's being taken forward with the individual departments with a view to looking at what the opportunities are within existing funding.
So what's its budget today?
Doesn't have a specific budget. It's being taken forward within existing funding that's out there in the various departments. I think in all of these things, and this is consistent with the whole outcome-based approach, that we look at low cost and no cost as well as full cost options, and where there's the opportunity to tweak funding in a particular way that can deliver the outcomes, that's what we seek to do.
Does it actually exist?
It does exist, but there's no funding attached to it because of the budgetary pressures that there were at the time.
What does it do?
It works with, as I say, it works with departments across departments to try and encourage approaches to play.
Has it achieved anything?
It has helped to focus departments on the importance of that aspect of play for children and young people as they deliver their programmes. But as I say, there's always a limit to how much can be done in those areas when there's not a budget attached.
Is it subject to a formal evaluation with the other 6?
It will be subject to an evaluation.
But it is not the 6 are currently being formally evaluated, yes?
That's right, yeah.
But the 7th is not.
7th will be.
But it is not currently.
Well, it's still ongoing and it will be, yeah.
So it is not currently being formally evaluated.
It is currently being formally evaluated.
It is formally. Oh.
We are monitoring what the progress is on that particular programme.
Specifically, is it being subject to the same formal evaluation today as the other 6?
I'd have to come back to you, Chair, on the detail of that one.
I was interested in what you said about stressing the seed funding nature, and if it was to be, if any of these signature projects were to be taken forward, then lead departments would have to pick up. And you highlighted literacy and numeracy because you obviously knew what was coming. It has been hailed, at least anecdotally, if not through formal evaluation, to have been a success. Would it not have been, why was it not possible to kind of signpost before the end of the seed money running out that here was a success and that actually there was a reputational damage to the executive and the assembly generally in the public seeing that an initiative that was successful ran out of dosh basically at the end of the pilot phase, where the Minister for Education seems to be making clear that actually he's going to pick it up again as a legacy issue?
Well, in all of these, the purpose of these programmes is to test proof of concept, to test whether an approach will work, and then to draw the lessons from that and try and build that into mainstream approaches. The reality is that the amount of funding that's put into these programmes is not of itself sufficient to have a significant impact and to deliver social change. They can only work if they actually become transformational in that they change the systems and processes within departments. So they have to demonstrate a change in approach. And that is what the Department of Education has done. They have identified what has been positive around the literacy and numeracy programme, and they have embedded that into the approaches that are being taken across the school system. They have also, and I can't present the full education policy here, it's really for the Department of Education, but they also have a range of other approaches to numeracy and literacy, a range of other programmes, and the best learning from this programme has been taken through and embedded into the other programmes that they have. So it's not a question of this programme just stopping and there being no benefit. The individual young people benefit significantly, and the lessons and learning from those has been embedded into wider programmes which will benefit a wider range of young people. And that is the intention of this programme.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned the young people, because to begin with you said the success was making major improvements in the systems operated by departments. But you know, if you are the young person or you're the parent of the young person, you've just seen a programme that really worked, and now we've hit a period where it's not available. Hopefully it's coming back on stream quite soon. Is it not a matter of regret that there's that hiatus currently in the middle?
Well, when I refer to systems, I'm referring to approaches to teaching and learning. I'm referring to the way teachers interact with children and young people, the way schools organise the delivery of their numeracy and literacy programmes, and that obviously impacts directly on the young people. And the Department of Education has taken the learning from this particular approach, and they've applied it in a way which they feel within the budget that they have, they can get maximum benefit of the learning from that programme.
As I understand it, the head of the civil service is already looking with senior colleagues at the next programme for government and the possibility of modelling for post 6th of May. Will the evaluations be complete, and will they input into the next programme for government?
Well, the evaluation in terms of the programme evaluation, the sort of things that we have learned from delivering social change and what works and what doesn't work and the things to look out for will be fed into that process. Because the next programme for government, as you'll be aware, is going to be outcomes focused. So it will have a series of objectives set in outcomes terms, and we will be looking at the various actions that need to be taken to deliver those outcomes. Those outcomes, by definition, being high level and being interrelated, will not be capable of being delivered by individual departments. They will require and will only work if departments work together and collaboratively, and that is exactly what the Delivering Social Change programme has been about. It's been about identifying a cross-cutting theme and then working with departments across departmental boundaries to try and identify good projects, take those forward and then disseminate the learning out to achieve better outcomes. So we will certainly be feeding in the outcome of our internal evaluation into that process.
To what extent then is OFM driving an appetite within the other departments for this cross-cutting activity? For example, did OFMDFM go to the Minister for Education and encourage him to pick up literacy and numeracy as a legacy issue?
Well, we have through the through the DSC programme board, we always talk about the evaluation, about next steps, about mainstreaming. So that is a subject of discussion, and we always would discuss with departments what their plans are. However, it is for those departments under our current reins. It's for those departments to decide how they take these things forward, where their individual funding is our individual departmental funding is required for this. It's not so much OFMDFM driving an approach across government. We are leading an approach across government which other departments are buying into. I mentioned the sort of internal review that we're doing. I mean, we have talked to those involved in delivering social change across departments and a number of stakeholders outside. And there's been a very positive response to the cross-departmental working, to the fact that there has been the opportunity and the space to try some of these new approaches, to test them out, and then if they work, to develop and mainstream them as much as possible, develop into existing practice, and where they don't, to move to something else. It's a safe space, if you like, to test these things out and then to build them through. And there's a range of lessons have come out of that. I mean, important, for example, to have the project identified in a collaborative way through discussion. To test those ideas at an early stage and strengthen them as far as possible to make sure that they are viable before you actually then fund them. To consider from the outset, this is for the future, the possibility of scaling up some projects. Some projects are very difficult to scale up and put on a larger footing because of the nature of the project, whether it's because of resource intensity or because of the staffing intensity. To look at whether projects are sustainable or not. It's all about making the links and making sure the right people are around the table, making the connections. It's also about sometimes looking at not something that's necessarily a completely new approach, but can you do more with some existing approaches? New isn't always better. New is different. You have to test whether it's better and more effective. Sometimes it's better actually to do more of what you're currently doing with maybe a slight tweak than it is to do something completely new. And this is about testing these things out. And as we move into a programme for government based on outcomes, increasingly the sorts of discussions we should be having are about, if that's what we want to achieve, and this is what is being proposed, where's the evidence that actually it works, or that is a better approach than this to achieve this outcome? That should change the nature of the discussion that is had across departments and across government, and will certainly increase the need for information, for evidence, and for the capacity to analyse that to achieve the outcomes we want.
I'm wondering the extent to which the OFMDFM sees itself as the sort of antennae of the executive, the early warning system that says, well, we mightn't have the evidence formally reviewed yet, but the intelligence we're picking up on the ground is that this is a really good programme, and therefore there is that sort of reputational risk that I described in having a hiatus. And your role would be to go and liaise with another department and say, are you aware this is working really well, or people think it's working really well? And really it would be better if we didn't allow it to be seen to shut down, only to be started up again in 6 months, 12 months.
Well, I think the departments themselves, as I say, through the programme board, they're represented at a senior level. They're fully aware of all the issues around public perception and around continuation of programmes. But I think the view from the Department of Education is very strongly that they have taken the lessons from numeracy and literacy. It was a success in its own right for those children and young people. They have benefited from it and will continue to benefit the rest of their lives. The learning from that programme has been built into the other initiatives that DE has, and indeed they have been looking at themselves at other approaches to addressing numeracy and literacy and dealing with deprivation, for example, through greater funding into TSN and so forth, through the school funding formula. So there's a range of other things that DE are doing, and I think they would be looking at the outcome of this numeracy and literacy programme alongside their other activities to get the best mix, to get the best outcomes in education.
David McElveen.
Thank you, Chair. And maybe just, I guess, elaborating slightly on that point, Mark. I mean, do you think, as we do move into an outcomes-focused programme for government, that your attitude as a senior official towards risk, innovation, dare I say it, even failure, may change?
I think a lot of things are going to change, but it's going to take time. I think we can draft an outcomes-focused programme for government. That only changes the document. What we really have to change is the way people interact, the view that they take, and the way they make decisions. So, fundamental to an outcome-based approach is the fact that this has to be cross-departmental, and there has to be commitment to the high-level outcomes that are contained in the programme for government, and that requires and drives joined-up working. And there are a number of things that can have the potential to militate against that, and we have to guard against, because there can be the departmentalism, there can be the accountability, there can be the departmental budgets. We have to find ways of getting around those problems to ensure there's genuine cooperative working, because you will always have the potential for a shared objective to potentially be in tension with a departmental objective, and we all know that that's the reality of what can happen. So we have to find the ways of collaborating, of recognising collaboration and seeing it as a significant skill, and trying to deal with those other difficulties that there are in the way our systems are set up, and find ways around them. But if there's a commitment to the outcome, if there's alignment, if there's a genuine desire to make things happen, as opposed to seeking to identify all the things that could go wrong, I think it's the point of your question, then yes, it will change behaviour.
Because I guess surely if you're sitting in front of a Public Accounts Committee in a new mandate and you are being accused of perhaps not managing your budget in an appropriate way, in delivering an outcome of improved literacy and numeracy, and you're very committed, able to sit there and say, well, actually, we're still on course for the outcome. This particular track didn't take us in the direction we perhaps wanted to. We know where the outcome is, we're still working towards that, and we're now going to have to try a different track which we believe will work. Well, surely that must make your job as an official easier. It must take some of the burden off you, in that if the programme for government is saying, well, we're going to measure you on outcomes as opposed to outputs, then that fear, that presence of fear that seems to have heretofore existed within some officials, within departments, of being over-scrutinised when it comes to the way in which they've gone about certain endeavours, surely it must reduce the pressure somewhat for you, and it must give you a little bit more autonomy just to get on with the job.
Well, I think it creates the space for more innovative approaches and different ways of looking at problems. I'm not sure it actually reduces the risk or reduces the pressure, because there will be a much sharper focus on whether things actually worked or not. I mean, at the moment in the programme for government, we have some commitments which are about spending a certain amount of money, which are about producing a report, which are totally within the control, hopefully often within the control of officials in terms of writing a strategy, set up a committee. You can do those things, done, ticked. If you're asked to produce an outcome, which is to improve the health and well-being of young people or something by a certain amount, that's a much more difficult outcome to actually get. So I actually think it may appear easier initially, but it's actually going to be a harder approach, which is going to demand a different way of working. But what we've found in some of the early discussions that we've had around the programme for government is the extent to which, when you're seeking to achieve one of these outcomes, it's often something from not so much from left field, but not directly connected with it, that makes the difference. If we take numeracy and literacy, and you look at the capacity of children to learn, so much of that relates to home circumstances and relates to parenting and relates to early experience of life, as opposed to the actual intervention in the school itself. So if you were only focusing on teaching, or you're only focusing on one aspect of this, then you're missing out the other factors which probably have an even bigger impact. When we were talking to the health people in this, they suggested that for some of these health and well-being indicators, it was only about 15% of the difference was made by interventions that were within the remit of the Department of Health. The rest was on other things. If you look at school, I think it's something like about up to 20% is made. The differences are made by school. It's the other factors. So that's That's where the different approach is critical here.
Well, I look forward to being here to challenge you on your first programme for government outcome. Thank you, Chair.
It sounds like we'll be taking a close look at outputs versus outcomes. Alex Atwood.
Thank you very much for that. Is DSC now, as a programme, concluded?
No, we have, for example, the Atlantic Philanthropy programmes.
The initial 6 programmes, are they?
The initial 6, in terms of funding, they've all come to an end. We have the 3 Atlantic Philanthropies, which will be running on to 2018-19, I think it is.
I'll come back to those later. But the initial phase DSC, in terms of funding, that's now concluded.
Yeah.
You gave the example of what education is taking forward in terms of legacy. Are there any other examples in taking it forward by any other department that you're aware of in terms of legacy and mainstreaming?
Well, understanding there haven't been decisions taken on these yet. My understanding is that they will all be taken forward in some shape or form by the departments, but I can't say that for certain because there's still consideration in departments, but there are very positive signs around the rest of them.
In your opening remarks, you did say they were all well placed to attract in some way funding by the departments. So maybe on the far side of ministers making decisions, you could advise us about where the DNA of the first phase of DSC is in departmental budgets.
Yes, happy to do that.
In terms of what education is taking forward, you said that there was 18,000 students in primary and secondary schools that got literacy and numeracy support, and 400 nurture units got support. Are you able to confirm what, in terms of the legacy funding, are the legacy work that education is now committed to do? Is there any figures about what the numbers might be in terms of nurture units or in terms of support to individual students might be?
There's currently support for 30 nurture groups, and that's due to end in March 2016. And our understanding is that DA is waiting for a final evaluation report from Queen's University on nurture provision, and is going to look at the options for future position of the nurture units when that's finalised.
So just to confirm, the example you gave was the Education Minister taking forward. Is that now subject to a Queen's review about whether he does take it forward?
Well, in respect of the nurture units, the education review, he wants to look at what the outcome of that evaluation is. And we are hearing positive noises, which is why I phrased my terms, but there's no decision taken by ministers yet.
I got a sense from you that if a decision had been not made, it was very close to being made in terms of education.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think across departments there will be proposals being put to ministers this
There's
month.
There's a question mark about what education might be doing in terms of taking forward legacy work arising from DSC on the numeracy, literacy and nurture units. There's still a question mark about it.
We're clear about the legacy work from the numeracy and literacy, but the learning that's been taken out has been through the ETI and others has been embedded into practice elsewhere, where we were awaiting a decision on the nurture units themselves because they involved budget.
And there's no heads up about what's happening in DETI around the social enterprise interventions, because there's 75 jobs around that.
Well, my understanding is that it's a similar situation in DETI where there's positive consideration being given to continuing the hubs. I mean, there has been some additional funding put in, I think, to extend the hubs by DSD and DETI, but in terms of taking it forward beyond that, that's still under consideration.
Just to be clear about the 75 additional jobs, those are additional jobs that are created within the hubs. They're not dependent on funding for the hubs. They're enterprises that came out of work within a social enterprise incubation hub.
Yeah.
So that's not dependent on funding continuing for a social enterprise hub. It's a separate issue.
And in terms of those 100 social enterprise initiatives.
Yep.
What was the split between new businesses and test trading?
There were, well, the information I have here is that there were 105 social economy startups, including 51 test traders, and that there were 75 new jobs.
And do you have any breakdown of test trading? Like, was that, for a week or for a month, or did it actually mature into a live business, for want of a better word?
I don't have that detail.
There'll be a mix of outcomes.
Okay. Well, you can provide that information.
Yeah.
And in terms of the new projects being taken forward between the department and Atlantic Philanthropies, that's been 18 months now since that was announced, September 2014. Could you update us where we are in terms of dementia, the shared education stream, and the third one?
Okay, maybe if I could just offer something in respect to that, Chair. In respect of the shared education, so far 348 schools and 145 partnerships have made application to be part of that project. 7,765 is a very precise number, but getting towards 8,000 pupils have been involved in shared activities across 37 partnerships. We've had over 650 school staff involved. There are 190 teachers and coordinators involved in coordination training, 1,800 pupils in 70 schools involved in the first round of Queen's University's attitudinal survey, and 30 sessions. In respect of...
And that's all arising from the September 14 initiative.
In respect of... I don't have the same breakdown in respect of numbers for the Dementia Services project. I think there was a delay in getting started because there was a problem in recruiting the technical staff that were necessary to develop some of the work. Again, but the 3 work streams are now underway, effective raising awareness, training and development, and short breaks and support for carers. So there are 3 different work streams and they're all advancing. As I say, a slight delay in terms of accessing the specialist staff that would have been required to deliver that support, but I understand that coordinators are now in place to be able to bring them together. They've initiated a programme of work that will develop around the sort of information then that the staff, once recruited and put into place, would use around raising awareness and delivering information to dementia sufferers and their carers. So that's reasonably well advanced. And then within the Early Intervention Transformation Programme, again, a fairly complex system of, I think in total 14 individual projects across 3 different work streams, looking at the capacity to deliver skills to give children the best start in life, so antenatal and very early years, then supporting families where problems arise before they need statutory involvement, and then subsequently a 3rd work stream which deals with families facing adversity and at risk of family breakdown, and where we're going there. So there are a variety of different programmes involved in that, and I think that's an area where we would like to see that there's been substantial progress actually.
And is AP, they're sort of determined to have spent all their money by 2018 generally, so there's no further AP funding, or is there?
Also, Atlantic Philanthropy are winding down their funding, and it'll be wound down by, we're looking at 2018-19.
Thank you. Dementia is getting 6.3 mil. There's a 4th category of spend beyond early intervention, shared education and dementia. So dementia gets 6.3. The 4th category is called evaluation support, and it's getting £2.15 million. What is that, and why is it 2.515 million?
I think Atlantic were quite keen that whenever we were delivering each of these programmes that we would look at the sort of learning that I think Mark has already referred to in respect of the initial signature programmes, where we would try to understand what differences were possible, learning from attempting different studies, so that we would develop the evidence base around which of the models of intervention best worked, and then understanding how they worked relative to other models that were already in practice, and then the application of that learning subsequently to ensure that best practice was being carried forward. In particular then, the way in which, given that it is supposed to promote joined up delivery across government departments, the way in which we could support changes in the delivery of that.
So how do you measure those things?
Well, that'll be part of the research programme, that's part of the evaluation programme that will be funded.
So you'll tender that out?
Well, that'll be part of the overall programme, yeah.
I mean, will it take a look at things like money saved in terms of so many family interventions prevented, so many young people in work and not on benefits? Will it take a broad, holistic view of what the impact is on society?
All of these projects are designed on the basis that through early intervention you prevent the very sorts of costs, Chair, that you have identified, and that should be part of the evaluation of the individual projects in terms of getting a sense of what the impact is on those who participate, what the impact in the project, what the impact is at a wider population level, and then within that what the potential cost savings are. But those sort of cost savings really rely on other types of research where people have been tracked through, and there's comparisons made between those who benefit from an intervention and don't have other difficulties, and those who go through and do have other difficulties. So in many cases that sort of information, for example, it happened around preschool, you know, where £1 invested saves 7, I think was the figure. That was all based on longitudinal research to provide the basis for early intervention. So that stuff should already be done, and has already provided the basis, and it's on the back of that we are promoting the early intervention.
Sure, I don't think it's possible to cost something that hasn't happened. But what we are trying to test through all of these signature programmes is the effectiveness of delivering a particular intervention to deliver an outcome. And the outcome being something which will lead people away. So that there's a correlation between improved educational outcomes and the life chances of those children. So whenever that's carried through, then clearly that will develop a range of savings. But I'm not entirely clear how you would cost that and how you would...
Well, I think you can measure the number of family interventions last year, this year, and in 3 years' time, and make some sort of guess about
absolutely.
whether DSC has made the impact. Final question, probably. You go down from 12 to 9 departments. Any concerns about what that's going to do to DSC?
No particular concerns, Chair, because this is a cross-departmental programme. It's an executive programme, so that should continue on regardless of the number of departments. It might actually make some of the delivery a little bit more straightforward in the fact you'll have fewer parties engaged in it, but I don't envisage any very significant impact on the programme.
Yeah, marginal improvement, hopefully, I would have thought.
Marginal impact, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that was the final question. One request to you, Mark. The Play and Leisure programme,
yeah.
I think we would appreciate a briefing as to where it is, who's involved, which departments are involved, what it is trying to achieve, what it has achieved.
We'll do that, Chair. I'd be happy to do that. Yeah.
I would appreciate that.
Okay.
Joe, Mark, I'm just being told your microphone's been off, so we're just going to start the second brief. Thank you very much. That's a long session for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, that moment when I ask, is there any other business to be raised today? And if not, we adjourn to Wednesday the 24th, 2 p.m, room 30. Thank you very much.
This is the